Shout out to all of our subscribers and members here on the channel. My name is Reese Waters and I'm troubled. Daniel Penny was acquitted Monday of criminally negligent homicide in the death of Jordan Neely, whose final moments on a New York City subway train were captured on bystander video that set off weeks of protests and drew national attention. The decision on the fifth day of deliberations came after the jury deadlocked Friday on the more serious charge of manslaughter, leading the judge to dismiss it. Penny faced up to 4 years in prison. Now, one thing that struck me as odd is if the jury was deadlocked on the more serious charge, how is it that they come to a unanimous decision on the less serious charge? Granted, there are going to be people that don't believe that he was guilty of anything and they could potentially hold out throughout. But certainly the people who thought he was guilty of the more serious charge, I would assume would have ridden even harder for the less serious charge. But let's move on. As the jury foreperson read the not guilty verdict, some observers in the courtroom applauded. Others began to audibly sob and yell, including Neely's father, Andre Zachary, who was escorted out. Quote, "This is America. That is the sound of black pain," one person said outside of the courtroom in Lower Manhattan to the verdict. Now, clearly, this is a case where you have a white defendant, you have a black victim, you have a man who had served in the military, and you certainly have a wealth chasm between the two. Obviously, Daniel Penny had the ability to get fairly good representation. I actually hate the fact that there is this racial difference in this particular case, because I feel like that muddies the waters a little bit and how people choose to perceive it. And we'll get to that later, because certainly there was some people who couldn't resist a moment to score some political points. And yes, I'm looking at you, JD Vance. This case really intrigued me as somebody that spent a lot of time living in New York City, having ridden the train, having seen the level of mental illness that is unaddressed in our society, period, but especially in New York City, and especially in public spaces in New York City. I have been in situations like that often. Now, I mentioned that I hate that this case broke down to black and white, but one thing that I see all of the time as I walk the streets, either in DC or even when I was in New York, is how a disproportionate amount of these people look like me. And with good reason, given the wealth inequality that we have in this country, given the fact that we've had so much systematically stripped from the black community and the ramifications of that, which leave us more dependent on a lot of our social services and social safety nets that we as a country have not seen fit to replenish. Because everybody wants to talk about mental illness when they need somebody to blame for some kind of horrific crime, but never when it comes to why don't we actually do what we need to do as a country, which means money, in order to make sure we actually deal and solve this problem and get these people the help that they need. Chants of no justice, no peace could be heard echoing from outside. The case divided people in New York and beyond, in some cases along political and racial lines. Neely was black, Penny is white. Some people viewed Penny as callous and his actions as criminal on the day he encountered Neely, who had been shouting and acting erratically when he boarded the subway train in Manhattan on May 1st of 2023. Others contend Penny was selfless in his attempt to protect fellow passengers. Now, one thing I'll say is I don't think that Daniel Penny got on the train with the explicit intent in order to accost Jordan Neely. So some level of protection was there in him deciding to inject himself into the proceedings. What we're talking about is his actions once he had injected himself all the way through to when he finally released Jordan Neely. So you have to tell me that that entire thing was an attempt to protect fellow passengers. The anonymous jury, made up of 7 women and 5 men, were told before they began deliberating they had to come to a unanimous decision on the top charge of manslaughter in the second degree before moving on to consider criminally negligent homicide. But Judge Maxwell Wiley changed that order Friday after jurors twice sent a note saying they couldn't reach an agreement. The judge had also instructed jurors to decide whether Penny's actions caused Neely's death, and if so, whether he had acted recklessly and in an unjustified manner. Now, to me, choking a man for that amount of time is negligent and unjustified. To me. I wasn't on the train. I'm not Daniel Penny. But what supersedes that for me, right? What supersedes that is we give so much attention into all the factors that went into Daniel Penny's actions, but how about the factors that went into Jordan Neely's actions, right? We are a country that has become increasingly hostile to poverty. We have become increasingly intolerant of poverty. And because the wealth gap is what it is in this country, that's going to come down on black people much harder than it is the rest of society. We are going to find ourselves in situations like this. The man said that he was willing to go to jail. And we know that prison services are horrific, specifically in New York. So this is a man who is walking around suffering from mental illness, which is unaddressed. He is unable to get help outside of jail to the point where he's willing to go inside of jail. We as a country have decided we're going to do absolutely nothing to help him, but then hold him fully responsible for his actions and how people might respond to those actions. So it's perfectly fine for somebody to restrain you to the point of death, but we're not going to do anything for you in the intervening time. So whatever happens to you happens. We're going to allow citizens to roam around freely without providing them any degree of help. But if somebody happens to object to the point of causing their death, whatever happens, happens. You tell me what that is other than criminalizing poverty. That's exactly what that is. And don't think it's a coincidence that we're coming up on double-digit billionaires in the Trump cabinet. This looks like it's going to get far worse before it gets better. But oh yeah, you told me he was a man of the people. Before he encountered Penny, Neely, a former Michael Jackson impersonator, ranted about being hungry and thirsty and said that he wanted to return to jail and didn't care if he lived or died, witnesses testified. Penny, 26, a former Marine and Long Island native, placed Neely in a chokehold that prosecutors said lasted almost 6 minutes. Do you know how long 6 minutes is? Do you have any idea how long 6 minutes is? Now, 6 minutes to have somebody in a chokehold. Do you have any idea how long that is? So if you're telling me that it was okay for him to have him in a chokehold for 6 minutes, what you're telling me is, based on Jordan Neely's behavior, you were fine with whatever happened to him. Because if you could hold him in a chokehold for 6 minutes, what can't you do? A New York City medical examiner ruled that Neely died from compression to his neck as a result of the chokehold. Neely's uncle, Christopher Neely, said he was taken aback as the verdict was announced because he thought the jury would at least convict him on the lesser charge. quote, at least give him a charge because it should be some type of penalty that should have been handed down to Danny Penny, period. They gave him no penalty, and I feel like the jury gave up on us. I would also say, since we're talking about criminalizing poverty, one thing we definitely know is that if the shoe was on the other foot, we would be talking about a whole different verdict right now. If Jordan Neely, okay, unhoused man with the history that he has, okay, had committed this level of crime, and there was a white victim, and especially if he had served in the military, we know he would have been dependent upon a public defender that in New York City is inundated with cases that would have pressed him to take a plea. We would not be here if the shoe was on the other foot. That we know. Dante Mills, a lawyer representing Neely's family, said at a news conference that he was disheartened by the verdict Monday as supporters held up a picture of Neely dressed as Jackson. Mills asked that Neely's death have meaning and urged that others, instead of becoming physical with someone who may be hungry, offer them food. Quote, he had a muffin in his pocket, Mills said, of what police later discovered in Neely's jacket. Jordan just wanted someone to acknowledge him on the train, but instead he was choked to. Think about how novel an idea that is, right? Think about how novel an idea that is at this point in our society, to feed the person who said that they were hungry. To give the person that said that they were thirsty something to drink. Think about what a novel idea that is. We do that, right? We feel like we've done our good deed for the month. And a lot of us can't wait to get a phone out and post it on social media because, of course, you got to get that. You got to get them TikTok likes if you actually going to reach out and help somebody. We're at a point where that is just novel. Like, that doesn't even occur to people to do. But we want to call ourselves a Christian nation. We are simultaneously trying to push Christian nationalism in all manners of our society while criminalizing poverty. America. During the trial, Penny's attorneys told jurors that he stepped in because he believed Neely might attack other passengers, and he intended only to restrain him until police arrived, which Penny also told police. They also argued that Neely was not by the chokehold and that it was impossible to measure how much pressure Penny had applied. A forensic pathologist hired by the defense testified that Neely died from a combination of his schizophrenia, synthetic sickle cell trait, and the struggle from being in Penny's restraint. I like how they put the struggle from being in Penny's restraint last. So that didn't really have a whole lot. So the likelihood is he was just probably going to end up dead. Is that what it is? Because you can give me all the litany of other factors you want. As long as the struggle from being in Penny's restraint is in there, then it's about the struggle from being in Penny's restraint. Or you have to tell me that man was going to be lying down in the subway car otherwise. Can you tell me that? But the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Neely, Dr. Cynthia Harris, told jurors it was her medical opinion that there are no alternative reasonable explanations for his death, and that those proposed by the defense were so improbable that it stands shoulder to shoulder with impossibility. I would agree. But back to what it was that Penny was arguing, which I find fascinating, that he says he stepped in because he believed Neely might attack other passengers. So we're at the point of you believe that somebody might attack somebody, then you can choke them for 6 minutes. You believe. So then once again, this perception that black men walk away with becomes a bit of a problem, right? becomes a bit of a problem, because after decades of media portrayals for the wanton criminality of black men, your belief can just run wild when you see us now, could it not? Yeah. During cross-examination, one of Penny's attorneys, Stephen Razor, sought to cast doubt on Harris's testimony about how she and her colleagues had come to the unanimous decision as to Neely's cause of death. Razor suggested that they had failed to consider all the facts before making that determination. The case also spurred debates about safety within the city's subway system and failures in addressing homelessness and mental illness, both of which Neely had struggled with. Jumaine Williams, a black Democrat who is New York City's public advocate, was among those who questioned why police let Penny go after questioning him at a precinct hours after Neely's. And one thing we definitely know is there's absolutely no way that Jordan Neely would have been let go. Is absolutely no way that Jordan Neely would have been let go. So there's your answer right there. AOC said that Neely had been, quote, murdered. Prominent Republicans like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Matt Gaetz praised Penny and promoted a fundraiser for his legal fund, which has raised more than $3 million. His defense team includes Thomas Caniff, a Republican who ran unsuccessfully for Manhattan District Attorney in 2021. Now, as infuriating as that is, it gets worse. The Vice President-elect J.D. Vance said on X in response to the verdict that justice was done in this case. It was a scandal Penny was ever prosecuted in the first place. It would be nice if there was a case like this that Republicans didn't try and utilize for political clout. Or what would be crazy, right? What would be crazy is if they actually decided to support and advocate for the less fortunate in this case. For if they decided to take a stance on helping others in that would be crazy if they did that, right? That would be crazy. But this comes at a time when I think the last two videos I put out have just been about black conservatives feeling like they are being mistreated and get the raw end of the deal, right? And then being left out of the Trump cabinet. Those are the last two videos I put out. This is who y'all choose to ride with. You are riding with a vice presidential candidate who said that justice had been, he could have just said nothing. He could have just said nothing, but he's like, oh, a prominent case where a white man is being accused of killing a black man who had not threatened him. Huh? And he was a Marine? Yeah. Put that out. Put that out. I don't know what's worse, the fact that he saw fit to say anything, or that Ron DeSantis and Matt Gaetz promoted a fundraiser and raised more than $3 million. And y'all want to tell me they aren't hostile towards us. That's what y'all want to tell me. That's what y'all want to tell me. Prosecutors did not dispute that Neely's actions on the train scared many of the passengers, or that he was on synthetic, which were found in his system. After her opening statement, Daphne Uran, an assistant prosecutor with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, said that Neely had demanded to be seen, and that despite his not having touched anyone and not having displayed a weapon or threatened to use one, many people on the subway car were frightened of what he might do. She said that Penny's initial intent was even laudable, but that he was reckless when he continued to choke Neely even after he posed no threat. I would love to even hear her say that the initial intent was laudable if the shoe was on the other foot. He was reckless after he continued to choke Neely even after he posed no threat, including after the train doors had opened at the next station and passengers could exit. For some of that time, she said, and video showed, two other men helped restrain Neely. One of those men testified he believed Penny held the choke for too long. At times, Uran said he even ignored the pleas of bystanders to let Neely go. In her closing argument, Uran said that no one had to and that Penny wasn't justified in his use of force. You obviously cannot kill someone because they are crazy and ranting and looking menacing. Uran told jurors in her closing argument, no matter what it is that they are saying. And also, I would assert here that perception matters. So when we walk around crazy and ranting and, quote, look menacing, it's not processed the same way that when other people walk around crazy and ranting and looking menacing. And his closing argument raised or prompted jurors to imagine that they were on a train the day Neely boarded, filled with rage and not afraid of any consequences. Now, he was filled with rage. Was that rage at his hunger? Was it rage at his hunger or at his thirst? Because the man said that he was hungry and thirsty. So trying to figure out why you are going with filled with rage. Because you know that a black man in a public space who is not presenting himself in a Clarence Thomas-like manner, it is so easy to say they are filled with rage, and people will, that will land with people. You could just say they're filled with rage, regardless of what he actually said. Yeah. With you sitting much as you are now in this tightly confined space, looking up at Mr. Neely, you have very little room to move and nowhere to run. Yeah, he painted that picture. He painted that picture of the out of control, hungry, thirsty black man. Yeah, painted that picture quite well. Danny, as the defense attorneys referred to Penny throughout the trial, naturally, put his life on the line and stepped up in the absence of police, Razor said. He put his life on the line, did. Now, if I were to believe that he put his life on the line for injecting himself in the situation at first, at what point was his life no longer on the line? Like after 3 minutes of choking him, was his life still on the line? Because that's what this case is about. This is not a simple assault case about him choking a man from behind for 30 seconds and handing him over to police. This is 6 minutes and a man. So you telling me his life was on the line for what, 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5.5 minutes, 6 minutes? You telling me his life was on the line? Filled with rage. He was filled with rage. At 2 minutes being choked, was he filled with rage? Because you wouldn't say that if it wasn't true the whole time. But you know better. You know that people will hold that rage and their perception of Jordan Neely, and that would supersede the actual facts of the case and what we're adjudicating, which is the 6-minute choke. Yeah. But Uran challenged the portrayal of Penny as a self-sacrificing and benevolent subway rider. In her opening statement, she said that Penny failed to acknowledge Neely's humanity. She continued that thread in her closing statement, playing video of Penny twice referring to Neely as a crackhead in an interview with police and telling jurors that he never asked about Neely's condition. Well, that certainly would provide some insight, now wouldn't it? That certainly would provide some insight into his thought process, interjecting himself, but also him holding the crackhead for 6 minutes. That definitely would provide some necessary color, certainly more so than the filled with rage. But one thing I can tell you is if he didn't acknowledge Neely's humanity during the event, he certainly didn't acknowledge it after, and neither did his attorneys. Quote, there is something else that is glaringly missing from his statement: any regret, any remorse, any self-reflection, she said. She added, he never expressed any sorrow about the man's. During deliberations, jurors asked to rewatch bystander videos of Penny restraining Neely, responding officer's body cam, and video of Penny's subsequent interview with 2 detectives at a precinct. Penny chose not to testify. During the trial, jurors heard more than 40 witnesses, subway passengers who witnessed Penny restrain Neely, police officers who responded to the scene, a Marine Corps instructor who taught Penny various chokeholds, the 2 pathologists, a psychiatric expert, and 6 character witnesses who included 2 Marines, Penny's mother, and one of his sisters. On Wednesday, Neely's father sued Penny, accusing him of negligent contact, assault, and battery that caused Neely's death. The civil suit was filed in New York State's Supreme Court, a trial-level court in New York State. And I can only hope that he has any level of the representation that Penny was afforded, given that we won't have a J.D. Vance tweet and a Ron DeSantis fundraiser to help a man pursue justice for his fallen son, who suffered not only at the hands of Daniel Penny, but also at the hands of America's continued criminalization of poverty and mental illness. And that's why I'm troubled.